Let's talk about musical intervals. Intervals are the distance between two pitches. They could be the difference between this one and this one, or the distance between this one and this one, or the distance between this one and this one. But two pitches, we're talking about how far apart they are. When we're measuring and analyzing intervals, we're looking at the quantity and the quality of each of those intervals. The quantity is going to be the number, like a third, and the quality is going to be some sort of tonality, like major or minor, something like that. And to analyze an interval, you need both pieces of information. You can say it's just a third, or that's a perfect interval or a major interval, but you're not getting the whole picture unless you have both. Now, to figure out the quantity of the interval, you simply have to look at how many letters it encompasses. If this is a bass staff, and this is an A, and then this is a C, that's going to be a third. And it doesn't matter if these have sharps or flats on either or both of them. If there's some kind of A and some kind of C, that's going to be a third, because you start counting with the number you're on, or the letter you're on, and then you count the next letter, and then the next letter. So if it spans 3 letters, then it's a third. If it were an A and an E, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters. And again, I could sharp this, or flat that, or double flat that, and that would affect the quality of the interval, but the quantity would stay the same. In this case, this would be a fifth, because it spans 5 letters. So the quantity, very quick and easy to figure out. To figure out the quality, though, you have to know the specific distance between those notes with whole steps and half steps. And a lot of theory textbooks and websites will tell you to count whole steps and half steps. They'll say like, major third is 2 half steps and or 2 whole steps, and then a major second is 2 half steps, and a minor third is a step and a half, and you have all of these numbers and you're memorizing all of them, and it gets very laborious and very slow and very inefficient. So instead, I'd like to offer you another way to figure out the quality of these intervals, and it's based on key signatures and scales. Let's take a look at that. So here I have the C major scale right here, and our standard all natural whole half C major scale. And to use this scale and your knowledge of this key to figure out all these intervals, all we're going to do is measure from the tonic of the scale up to each scale degree. So for instance, from here, from C to C, how many letters does that encompass? One letter. So that's going to be some type of first, or sometimes referred to as unison, or even as a prime. If we go from C to D, this is 2 letters, C, D, so it'll be some kind of second. And if we go from C to E, it will be some kind of third. You can see that with each scale degree of the scale measuring from the tonic to that scale degree gives me that interval. A fourth there, a fifth here, again, from C up to G, or from the tonic up to the 5th note, the dominant, gives me a 5th. From the tonic to the 6th note gives me a 6th. From the tonic to the 7th gives me a 7th, and from the tonic to the octave, or to the 8th of it, gives me an octave, an 8th. We don't write the NDs and RDs and THs and all these. We just write the number. So this is a first, second, a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and 8th, otherwise called an octave. So that's the quantity. To figure out the quality, though, this is a major scale. And a major scale, every major scale, because the pattern of every major scale is the same, every major scale will produce the same interval pattern as well. If the scale pattern is the same, the interval pattern is the same. And the pattern of this is a major second, a major third, perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, a major sixth, a major seventh, and a perfect octave. So we have major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, perfect octave. There are more types of intervals than just major and perfect. But in a major scale, if we measure from the tonic up, it's very important that you note, from the tonic up in a major scale, all of the intervals that it produces are either major intervals or perfect intervals. And we'll talk about the distinction between major intervals and perfect intervals in a little bit. But if we measure from the tonic up, we get major, major, perfect, perfect, major, major, perfect. And so that's our pattern. I should also point out that seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths can never be perfect intervals. And fourths, fifths, and eighths can never be major intervals. So these are kind of two separate groups. Now, if you ever needed to double check these, you could, of course, figure out how many whole steps and half steps are between each of these, and I'll let you look on musictheory.net if you want to reference all of those. But the shortcut, if you already know key signatures and you already know scales, is to look through and use this pattern so that you can just think of it much more quickly instead of having to count it all. Now, what about in terms of minor? Well, if I looked at C minor, which is what key signature? C minor. The parallel minor of this would be 3 flats. And I did the exact same thing where I was looking at every note in the scale and I was measuring from the tonic to each of those notes. So from C to C, C to D, C to E flat now, because we're in a different key, it has a flat on it, C to F, C to G, C to A flat, C to B flat, and then C to C again. We'll notice that many of these are the same pitches. For example, C to C is the same. Oh, I should go back and talk about this for a second. I said it was a unison or a prime or a first. It is a perfect unison or perfect prime or perfect first. So when I look here again, that is the same. In fact, if I look at all of the perfect intervals, these notes have not changed when I go from one key signature to its parallel key. So the unison or the first, the fourth, the fifth, and the eighth are all still the same. That's one of the reasons why we call them perfect intervals, is that these are all consistent from parallel keys. Now, some of these, the others have changed, and one of them is the same. Our C to D in both of these is the same. So that we can keep the same. But here, we have C to E natural, and we have C to E flat. So we've taken our major interval, and we've decreased it by a half step. And it's important to note that if we take a major interval, and we make it smaller, now we have a minor interval. Conversely, if we take a minor interval and we make it bigger, we get a major. And I'm talking in movements of a half step. A major interval decreased by a half step becomes a minor interval. A minor interval increased by a half step becomes a major interval. So here, our major second stayed the same, but here, C to E natural became C to E flat. So we've decreased the size of the interval. We've changed it from a major third to a minor third. And note that I'm saying increase and decrease and not raise and lower, despite the fact that we may be talking about flats and naturals. It's not about how high or how low the notes are. It's about how close together or far apart the notes are. So when you're talking about in terms of intervals, it's more important that you're thinking about the distance than whether or not something has a sharp or a flat on it. The sharp or flat affects the distance, But don't just automatically assume that flatted notes will produce minor intervals, because they won't. They're just as likely to produce major intervals. So here we have a minor third and a major third. Now let's go over to here. We had C to A, both natural, and now C to A flat. So that's taken this major interval and it's decreased it by a half step. So C to A flat is a minor sixth. And you probably figured out the pattern by here. C to B natural is a major seventh. C to B flat is a minor seventh. So again, we're looking at our major intervals were decreased by a half step. And that produced our perfect intervals. We'll just kind of bracket this little note over here. Sorry, I'll say that again. Our major intervals were decreased by a half step, and that produced our minor intervals. I think I said it wrong a second ago. Yet our perfect intervals all stayed the same. This one right here didn't change, and kind of based on the pattern, we maybe would think it would. If we change this interval as well, then it would make the scale sound very, very strange. So this one stays the same. But aside from that, our minor key produced minor intervals and perfect intervals, in comparison to our major key, which produced all major and perfect intervals. So if you know your keys and you know your scales, then you can very quickly determine if an interval is major or minor simply by thinking, does it fit into the major scale or the minor scale for the bottom note? For instance, C to E fits into the major scale, C major scale. So it's a major third. But C to E flat fits into the minor scale, C minor scale. And so that's a minor interval. Of course, we can double check it by actually figuring out the number of half steps and whole steps between those two. But this is a much quicker and easier way. We'll talk more in the next couple of videos about how to do that quickly and how to walk through that pattern. But all of that knowledge is based on this. Do you understand that major keys produce major and perfect intervals, and for the most part, minor keys produce minor and perfect intervals? We're differing in the third, the sixth, and the seventh, which is really not a lot of difference when you consider how different major and minor keys feel. That we're only looking at 3 different intervals out of all 8.